Some families don't break apart with screaming. Sometimes they fall apart with one sentence spoken quietly in front of everyone. I still remember the sound of crystal glasses clinking the moment my father stood up to make his anniversary toast. The ballroom at Maplewood Country Club glowed with soft, golden lights, and the string quartet near the fireplace played old Frank Sinatra songs loud enough to cover awkward silences, but gentle enough to make everyone feel elegant. My mother had spent 6 months planning their 35th wedding anniversary party. There were nearly 80 guests there that night. Cousins from Boston. Old neighbors from Connecticut. Business friends from New York. Even people I hadn't seen since the early 90s. Everywhere I looked, someone smiled politely at me, but something about those smiles felt rehearsed, almost nervous. At 62 years old, I thought I understood my family better than anyone. I was wrong. I should have known something felt off the moment I arrived. My older sister Diane hugged me too quickly, barely touching my shoulders before stepping away like she was afraid of standing too close to me. My mother Linda looked beautiful in her navy blue dress, but her hands trembled every time she reached for her wine glass. And my father Robert barely acknowledged me at all. He shook hands with my husband Daniel, nodded at my daughter Rachel, then looked straight past me as if I were another guest he couldn't quite place. It stung more than I wanted to admit. My father had never been affectionate, but age had made him colder somehow. Still, I told myself not to ruin the evening with old feelings. This party wasn't about me. It was about celebrating 35 years of marriage. Or at least that's what I believed then. Around 8:30, the ballroom lights dimmed slightly as servers brought out slices of vanilla buttercream cake topped with fresh strawberries. My mother smiled for photographs while guests gathered near the dance floor holding champagne flutes. Then Robert stood slowly from his chair and tapped a silver spoon against his glass. The entire room quieted almost instantly. My father always carried authority without trying. Even at 84, his voice could silence a crowd. "Thank you all for coming tonight," he began calmly. 35 years ago, Linda and I built this family from nothing." Guests nodded and smiled. Someone near the back clapped softly. I noticed Diane staring down at the tablecloth instead of looking at him. "We survived difficult years," my father continued. "Financial hardship. Illness. Mistakes." His eyes moved slowly across the room until they landed directly on me. Something inside my chest tightened immediately. "And some things," he said carefully, "should have stayed buried in the past." The room went completely still. I felt every eye turning toward me before I even understood why. My father's expression didn't change. No anger. No emotion at all. Just cold certainty. Then he said the sentence that shattered my entire understanding of my life. "You were never supposed to come back, Evelyn." At first, I honestly thought I had misheard him. My fingers froze around my champagne glass. Across the table, Daniel whispered my name quietly, but I couldn't answer. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Not even my mother. I looked at her instinctively, waiting for confusion, outrage, anything. Instead, Linda lowered her eyes to the floor. That was the moment fear truly entered my body. Because it wasn't shock on her face. It was guilt. Diane suddenly reached for her water glass so quickly she nearly knocked it over. My daughter Rachel stared at me in disbelief. A few guests exchanged uncomfortable looks, but what disturbed me most was this horrible feeling that several people in that room already knew exactly what my father meant. My throat felt dry. "Dad," I finally managed softly, forcing a nervous laugh. "What does that even mean?" He didn't answer immediately. He simply took a sip of champagne while keeping his eyes fixed on me. "It means," he said quietly, "some truths arrive too late to fix what they destroy." My stomach dropped so hard I thought I might faint. Around us, conversations began in low whispers. I saw one of my cousins pull her husband closer and murmur something into his ear. Near the entrance, my Aunt Carol looked visibly panicked. Daniel placed his hand gently on my back, but even his touch felt distant suddenly, like I had stepped outside my own life and was watching everything happen from somewhere far away. Then my father smiled. Not warmly. Not proudly. Just faintly. "Anyway," he said, raising his glass toward the crowd, "thank you all for being part of our family's story." People clapped awkwardly, relieved the speech seemed over, but I couldn't move. My heart pounded so loudly I barely heard the music restart. Across the ballroom, I noticed the giant family slideshow still playing on the projector screen near the fireplace. Photos from vacations, Christmas mornings, birthdays, decades of memories. But as image after image faded across the screen, a strange realization slowly crawled into my mind. There were almost no childhood photos of me. And for the first time in my entire life, I began wondering why. The rest of the party moved around me like a dream that no longer felt real. People returned to their conversations, waiters carried trays of champagne across the ballroom, and the quartet resumed playing soft jazz near the fireplace, but none of it sounded normal anymore. Every laugh felt forced. Every glance felt loaded with something I could not understand. I stood near the projector screen pretending to watch old family photographs fade across the wall while my mind replayed my father's words over and over again. "You were never supposed to come back. Not welcome back. Not come home. Come back." As if I had once disappeared. As if there was a version of my life nobody had ever told me about. Daniel leaned closer beside me and lowered his voice. "Evelyn, maybe your father had too much to drink." I almost laughed at that. My father had spent 40 years criticizing people who drank too much. Robert Carter never lost control publicly. Not once in his life. Every word he spoke was deliberate. "No," I whispered quietly. "He meant it." Across the ballroom, I noticed my mother speaking nervously with Diane near the dessert table. Diane kept shaking her head while glancing toward me every few seconds. The moment she realized I was watching, she forced a smile that looked painful. Then she walked quickly toward me holding 2 glasses of sparkling water. "You okay?" she asked too casually. "Should I not be?" I replied. She handed me a glass without answering directly. Diane had always hated uncomfortable conversations. Even as children, she avoided conflict by pretending nothing was wrong. But tonight she looked frightened. Not embarrassed. Frightened. "Dad is old," she finally said. "You know how he gets sometimes." "No," I said calmly. "Actually, I do not." Her expression tightened immediately. "Evelyn, please do not make a scene tonight." That sentence hit me harder than my father's speech. Not because of what she said, but because of what it implied. Make a scene. As though everyone already expected me to react badly to something they understood better than I did. I stared at my sister for several seconds before asking the question quietly. "What exactly does everybody know except me?" Diane's face lost color instantly. "Nobody knows anything," she answered too fast. Then she turned away before I could stop her. My chest felt colder by the minute. I walked toward the slideshow projector near the fireplace, trying to steady my breathing. The screen displayed family memories from decades of birthdays, vacations, and Christmas mornings. There was Diane at her high school graduation in 1978. Diane at Cape Cod with my parents in matching sweaters. Diane opening presents beside our father in front of a giant stone fireplace. Then another photograph appeared. Then another. Suddenly I realized nearly every childhood picture centered around Diane. I stepped closer to the screen. There were photographs of me, but very few before the age of 10. And even those looked strangely distant, almost staged. In one picture from what appeared to be a 4th of July picnic, Diane sat between my parents, smiling brightly while I stood several feet away near the edge of the frame holding a paper plate. In another Christmas photo, Diane sat beside my father opening gifts while I remained half hidden behind the sofa. I had seen these photographs my entire life, but tonight they looked different somehow. Like clues I should have noticed years ago. "Funny, isn't it?" a quiet voice said beside me. I turned and saw Aunt Carol standing there holding a glass of white wine. She was my mother's older cousin, nearly 80 now, with silver hair and sharp blue eyes that always seemed to notice too much. "What is?" I asked carefully. She looked toward the slideshow screen. "The way families edit memories over time." My stomach tightened. "What does that mean?" For a moment, she seemed unsure whether to continue. Then she sighed softly. "Some photographs disappear because they hurt people," she said. "And some disappear because they reveal too much." Before I could respond, my mother suddenly appeared beside us. "Carol," she interrupted sharply. "They are about to serve coffee." The tension between them was immediate. Aunt Carol studied my mother's face for a long second before giving me a sad look that unsettled me deeply. "You deserved honesty years ago," she said quietly. Then she walked away. I turned toward my mother immediately. "What honesty?" Linda's lips parted slightly, but no answer came out. Up close, I could see her mascara beginning to smudge near the corners of her eyes. She looked exhausted. Older than she had even an hour earlier. "Mom," I whispered. "What is happening?" She glanced across the ballroom toward my father. Robert stood near the bar speaking calmly with two businessmen as if nothing unusual had happened at all. Then my mother lowered her voice so softly I almost missed the words. "Not here." My heart started pounding again. "Then where?" But before she could answer, the slideshow screen behind us suddenly changed to an old black and white photograph I had never seen before. Two little girls stood beside a lake somewhere, both around 5 years old, both blonde, both wearing matching white summer dresses. One of them was clearly Diane. The other looked enough like me to stop my breathing entirely. But it was not the photograph itself that shook me. It was the handwritten date at the bottom corner. August 1968. 2 years before the day my parents always claimed I was born. For several seconds, I could not breathe. The photograph remained frozen on the projector screen while soft piano music continued playing somewhere behind me, completely disconnected from the storm building inside my head. August 1968. I stared at the date again and again, trying to convince myself I was misunderstanding something obvious. My parents had always celebrated my birthday in November of 1970. I knew the story by heart because my mother repeated it every year when I was growing up. She used to tell me I arrived during an early snowstorm after 16 hours of labor at St. Mary's Hospital in Hartford. She remembered every detail too clearly for it to be fake. Or at least I thought she did. "Turn that off," my father suddenly said from across the ballroom. His voice was sharp enough to cut through every conversation in the room. The slideshow stopped instantly. The screen turned black. Several guests looked uncomfortable and quietly returned to their tables, pretending not to notice what had just happened. But the damage was already done. I turned slowly toward Robert. "Who was that little girl?" I asked. My voice sounded calm somehow, even though my pulse felt violent inside my chest. My father walked toward me with measured steps, still carrying the same glass of champagne. He did not look angry. That almost frightened me more. "This is not the time," he said quietly. "No," I replied. "I think it is exactly the time." Around us, the tension became unbearable. Daniel stood beside me protectively while Rachel watched my parents with growing confusion. Diane remained near the dessert table, refusing to look at anyone. My mother appeared close to tears. "Robert," she whispered nervously. "Please." But my father ignored her completely. "You always ask too many questions," he told me coldly. I felt something inside me harden at those words. Suddenly memories began surfacing that I had not thought about in decades. Small moments. Strange moments. The kind people dismiss because they do not fit neatly into ordinary life. I remembered being 8 years old and hearing my parents argue late one night behind their bedroom door. I could not understand most of the conversation, but I remembered one sentence clearly because it had frightened me at the time. My father had said, "She is going to find out eventually." Back then I assumed they were talking about money problems or family drama. Now I was no longer sure. Another memory surfaced immediately after. I was maybe 12, standing in the kitchen after school while my mother searched frantically through a drawer full of paperwork. When I asked what she was looking for, she snapped at me harder than she ever had before. "Some things do not belong to you." I remember crying in my bedroom afterward because her reaction seemed so cruel over ordinary papers. But now every old memory felt different somehow. Like pieces of a puzzle finally turning toward each other. "Evelyn," Daniel said gently beside me, "maybe we should leave." I almost agreed. Every instinct told me to walk out of that ballroom and never return. But another feeling had already taken hold of me. I needed answers more than I needed comfort. "No," I said softly. "Not yet." My father studied me for a long moment before speaking again. "You are upsetting your mother." I looked at Linda. Tears filled her eyes now, but she still would not meet my gaze directly. "Am I?" I asked quietly. "Or is the truth upsetting her?" Diane suddenly crossed the room toward us. "Enough," she hissed under her breath. "People are staring." "Good," I answered immediately. "Maybe somebody should finally explain what is happening." Her face turned pale. "You do not understand." "Then help me understand." Diane glanced nervously toward our father before lowering her voice. "Not here." Those same words again. "Not here." As though my entire existence contained some secret too dangerous to speak aloud in public. I turned toward the ballroom windows, needing air. Outside, light snow had started falling across the country club parking lot, covering expensive cars in a thin white layer. Everything looked peaceful out there. Normal. Meanwhile, my entire identity suddenly felt unstable. Rachel approached me slowly. "Mom," she whispered carefully, "why would Grandpa say something like that?" I opened my mouth to answer, but nothing came out. Because I did not know. And for the first time in my life, I realized there might be enormous parts of my own history that had been hidden from me intentionally. Then something else hit me all at once. "St. Mary's Hospital," I murmured quietly to myself. My mother looked up immediately. Fear flashed across her face so fast she could not hide it. That reaction told me more than words could have. "What about it?" Diane asked too quickly. I stared directly at my mother now. "You always told me I was born at St. Mary's in Hartford." Nobody answered. "But St. Mary's closed in 1969. Silence. Complete silence. I had read an article about it years earlier when the old building was demolished to make room for luxury apartments. I never thought twice about the timing until this exact moment. My father's jaw tightened slightly. My mother looked like she might collapse. And Diane whispered something under her breath that made my blood run cold. She was never supposed to remember that. The silence after Diane's words felt heavier than anything my father had said all night. She was never supposed to remember that. I stared at my sister while every sound in the ballroom seemed to fade into the background. The soft music. The clinking silverware. The nervous conversations happening 20 feet away. None of it mattered anymore. Diane realized too late what she had admitted. Her face turned white almost instantly. "That is not what I meant," she said quickly. But nobody believed her. Not even herself. "Then explain what you meant," I replied quietly. My voice sounded calmer than I felt. Years ago I would have cried or yelled or begged someone to tell me the truth. But something about tonight had changed me already. I was no longer afraid of the answers. I was afraid of how long everyone had lied to me. My father stepped forward before Diane could speak again. "This conversation is over." "No," I answered immediately. "It is finally starting." Several nearby guests pretended not to watch us, but I could feel their attention anyway. My mother pressed trembling fingers against the pearl necklace around her throat. "Please," she whispered to me, "not tonight." That sentence almost made me laugh. Not tonight. As though there had ever been a right time to discover your life might be built on secrets. "How long?" I asked softly, looking directly at her. Tears filled her eyes again. "Evelyn, how long have all of you been lying to me?" Nobody answered. That silence became the answer. Daniel leaned closer and whispered, "Maybe we should go home." But I shook my head slowly. I could not leave now. Not after spending 62 years inside a story that suddenly no longer made sense. Across the ballroom, Aunt Carol watched everything carefully from her table near the windows. When our eyes met, she gave me the smallest nod, almost like encouragement. That frightened me more than anything else because it meant this secret went far beyond one careless comment from my father. Other people knew. Maybe they always had. "I need air," Rachel whispered quietly beside me. My daughter looked shaken, confused, almost betrayed herself. I squeezed her hand gently. "Go sit outside for a few minutes with your father," I told her softly. Daniel hesitated before leaving. "Call me if you need me." I nodded without taking my eyes off my parents. The moment they walked away, my father lowered his voice. "You are embarrassing this family." I stared at him in disbelief. "Embarrassing this family?" I repeated. "You just told me in front of 80 people that I should not have come back." His expression remained cold. "Some things are difficult to explain." "Then try." For a moment, I thought he might actually tell me the truth. His face changed slightly, almost like exhaustion breaking through years of control. But then Diane stepped between us. "Dad," she said nervously, "we should leave before this gets worse." Worse. That word echoed in my mind immediately. Worse than discovering your own birth story might be fake? Worse than realizing your family photographs looked edited? Worse than hearing your sister accidentally admit you remembered something you were never supposed to remember? "What happened in 1968? I asked suddenly. My mother gasped softly. Diane froze. And my father's eyes changed for the first time all night. Fear. Real fear. It lasted maybe 1 second before he hit it again, but I saw it clearly. "Nothing happened," he answered sharply. "That photograph said otherwise. It was an old family picture. Then why was it removed?" My father said nothing. I turned toward my mother instead. Who was the little girl standing beside Diane? Linda looked physically ill now. Mascara streaked lightly beneath her eyes while her hands trembled against the edge of the tablecloth. "Please stop asking questions tonight," she whispered. "I cannot." Her breathing became uneven. "Evelyn, some memories are painful." "For who?" I asked quietly. "For me? Or for all of you?" Suddenly Aunt Carol stood from across the room and walked toward us before anyone could stop her. Every step she took seemed deliberate. Calm. Dangerous. My father immediately stiffened when he saw her approaching. "Carol," he warned coldly. She ignored him completely. "Your daughter deserves better than this," she said firmly. "She deserved better years ago. Stay out of this." Robert snapped. But Aunt Carol did not back down. She looked directly at me. "Do you remember the lake house in Vermont?" The question caught me off guard completely. "What?" "The lake house," she repeated softly. "Do you remember going there when you were little?" At first I almost said no. Then suddenly an image flashed through my mind so vividly it made my stomach tighten. A wooden dock. Yellow wildflowers near the water. A white swing hanging from a giant oak tree. I stopped breathing for a second. I remember a swing. My mother closed her eyes immediately like someone in physical pain. Aunt Carol nodded slowly. "You were very young. We never owned a lake house." Diane interrupted too quickly. But I barely heard her anymore because another memory had surfaced beneath the first one. A woman laughing. Not my mother. Someone younger. Blonde hair blowing in the wind while she called my name from somewhere near the water. And then another detail hit me hard enough to make my knees weak. She had not called me Evelyn. The moment that memory surfaced, my entire body went cold. I could hear the woman's voice clearly inside my head now. Warm. Gentle. Familiar in a way that made my chest ache. But she had not called me Evelyn. She had called me Ellie. The nickname echoed through me like something buried alive for decades suddenly forcing its way back to the surface. My mother grabbed the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles turned white. Carol, she whispered shakily. Please stop. But Aunt Carol kept her eyes on me. Do you remember anything else? She asked softly. I closed my eyes for a second, trying to steady the flood of emotions rushing through me. More fragments appeared immediately. Sunlight reflecting off lake water. The smell of pine trees. A yellow towel wrapped around my shoulders while someone brushed my wet hair back gently. Then another image came sharply into focus. A silver bracelet with tiny blue stones. The woman at the lake house wore it every day. My breathing became uneven. I know her, I whispered before I could stop myself. I know that woman. My father's expression darkened instantly. Enough. Who was she? I asked, opening my eyes again. Nobody answered. Diane looked close to panic now, constantly glancing toward nearby guests, as though she feared the entire ballroom might overhear us. But I no longer cared who listened. Who called me Ellie? I demanded quietly. My mother suddenly burst into tears. Not polite tears. Real ones. Painful ones that seemed dragged out of her against her will. Several guests turned openly toward us now. My father stepped closer to her immediately. Linda! I cannot do this anymore, she whispered through trembling breaths. Something inside me cracked hearing that sentence. Because it sounded less like guilt and more like exhaustion. Like someone carrying a secret too heavy for too many years. Mom, I said carefully. Tell me the truth. She covered her face for a moment before finally looking up at me. You were very little, she whispered. There was an accident near the lake. My stomach tightened instantly. What kind of accident? Before she could answer, my father interrupted sharply. We are leaving. No, I said immediately. You are not walking away from this again. Robert Carter had spent his entire life controlling every room he entered. He controlled business meetings, family holidays, church donations, neighborhood gossip, even dinner conversations. But tonight I watched something unfamiliar happen to him. He was losing control. You are making assumptions based on half memories, he said coldly. Then give me the full memory. He stared at me for several seconds without speaking. Then Diane suddenly stepped forward. She does not remember because she was not supposed to, she blurted out. The room seemed to stop breathing around us. Even my father looked stunned that she said it aloud. Diane, he warned. But she ignored him completely now. Her eyes filled with frustration and fear all at once. You think this has been easy for us? She snapped quietly. You think we wanted to live like this forever? Live like what? I asked. My voice barely sounded human anymore. Diane looked toward our mother before lowering her eyes. After the accident, she whispered, everything changed. What accident? Another long silence followed. Then Aunt Carol spoke the words nobody else wanted to say. 2 little girls disappeared near Lake Champlain in the summer of 1968. I felt the blood drain from my face. What? There was a storm that night, Carol continued softly. Police searched for hours. Boats. Rescue teams. The entire town was terrified. My hands started shaking uncontrollably now. What does this have to do with me? Nobody answered immediately. My mother looked devastated. My father looked furious. Diane looked trapped. And suddenly I understood something horrifying. This was not one lie. This was an entire life built around protecting something. Were we there? I asked quietly. My mother nodded once through tears. Yes. My pulse pounded so loudly I could barely hear myself think. Who disappeared? My father inhaled slowly like a man preparing for impact. But before he could speak, Aunt Carol answered first. You did. The words hit me harder than anything else that night. For a second I genuinely thought I might collapse. No, I whispered automatically. That is impossible. The newspapers said one child was never found. Carol continued carefully. The family left town shortly after. Stop talking, My father snapped. She deserves the truth. No, he said sharply. She deserves peace. Peace? I repeated weakly. How could I possibly have peace after this? My mother stepped toward me slowly now, tears falling openly down her face. We thought you were gone, she whispered. For almost 3 days. Every sound around me faded again. 3 days. Missing for 3 days. A lake. Another woman calling me Ellie. My entire childhood suddenly felt unstable beneath my feet. Then one final detail surfaced inside my memory so clearly it made my stomach twist. I remembered standing in a hospital hallway as a child while 2 strangers argued nearby in hushed voices. One of them had said something I never understood until now. If the wrong family finds her first, everything changes. For several seconds, nobody spoke after those words. If the wrong family finds her first, everything changes. The sentence repeated in my head while the ballroom around me blurred into soft light and distant noise. I felt disconnected from my own body, like I was standing outside my life watching strangers discuss someone else's childhood. My mother sat down heavily in her chair, wiping tears from her face with trembling fingers. My father remained standing beside her, rigid and silent, the same way he stood during funerals and business meetings whenever emotions threatened to interfere with control. But tonight his silence no longer felt powerful. It felt desperate. What family? I asked quietly. Nobody answered immediately. I looked from face to face searching for one honest reaction. Diane stared at the floor. Aunt Carol folded her arms tightly across her chest. My father refused to look directly at me now. Only my mother seemed unable to hide her emotions anymore. Linda, my father warned softly. She ignored him. There were 2 families at the lake that summer, she whispered. Ours and another family staying nearby. My pulse quickened instantly. Who were they? Again my father interrupted before she could continue. This conversation should happen privately. It should have happened 60 years ago. Aunt Carol snapped back. Several guests had quietly started leaving the ballroom by now, uncomfortable with the tension hanging over the anniversary party. Chairs scraped softly across the floor while waiters cleared untouched dessert plates from nearby tables. But none of us moved. My entire world seemed balanced on whatever truth came next. The other family had a little girl. My mother continued shakily. Close to your age. Her name? Linda closed her eyes briefly before answering. Eleanor. The name hit me like a physical force. Ellie. My knees weakened so suddenly I grabbed the back of a chair to steady myself. No, I whispered automatically. No, that cannot be. But deep inside me, something already knew. Memories kept surfacing faster now. A woman singing softly near a lakeside porch. Tiny blue flowers painted on bedroom wallpaper. Someone brushing my hair while calling me Eleanor Grace. Not Evelyn. Never Evelyn. You found me, I said slowly, staring at my parents. Did you not? My mother broke down completely then. She covered her face while crying openly in front of everyone. My father finally spoke again, his voice colder than ever. We rescued you. From what? He hesitated too long. From confusion, he answered finally. I stared at him in disbelief. That is not an answer. You were traumatized, he said sharply. You did not remember where you belong. So you decided for me? My father's jaw tightened. We protected this family. That sentence told me more than he realized. Not we protected you. We protected this family. Suddenly another memory pushed through the fog in my mind. A hospital room with pale green walls. A police officer kneeling in front of me asking gentle questions. Then my father entering the room and telling the officer firmly, "She is our daughter." I had always assumed that memory belonged to a childhood illness or injury. Now I understood it differently. Did they look for me? I asked quietly. My mother lowered her head. Nobody answered. Did Eleanor's family search for her? Silence again. My chest tightened painfully. Oh my God! I whispered. They thought I disappeared forever. Evelyn, my mother began weakly. Do not call me that right now. The words came out sharper than I intended, but I could not stop them. Because for the first time in my life, even my own name felt uncertain. Diane suddenly stepped closer to me. You have to understand something, she said quickly. Things were different back then. People handled situations differently. I turned toward her slowly. What situation? She looked terrified now. After the storm, nobody knew whose child was found first. There was confusion. Panic. The police were overwhelmed. And? Diane swallowed hard. Dad recognized you before anyone else did. A horrible feeling settled into my stomach immediately. Recognized me? My father finally looked at me directly again. You looked enough like our family. I stared at him in silence. Enough? He did not answer. Aunt Carol did. Your father made a choice, she said quietly. And once enough time passed, the lie became permanent. It was not a lie, Robert snapped sharply. She became our daughter. I already was someone's daughter, I whispered. Nobody had an answer for that. Across the ballroom, I noticed Rachel and Daniel standing near the entrance watching us anxiously. My daughter looked pale and shaken. I realized suddenly that this nightmare was not only rewriting my past. It was rewriting hers too. Every family story, every medical history, every memory connected to generations before us. All of it uncertain now. Then one final detail surfaced inside my mind with terrifying clarity. I remembered waking up in a dark room as a child while my mother sat beside my bed whispering something over and over again. At the time I thought she was comforting me after a nightmare. But now I heard the words differently. You are Evelyn now, she had whispered. You are safe. You are Evelyn now. The drive home that night felt unreal. Snow covered the Connecticut roads in thin silver lines while Daniel kept both hands tight on the steering wheel, glancing at me every few minutes like he was afraid I might suddenly disappear. Rachel sat quietly in the back seat staring out the window, still trying to process everything she had heard. Nobody knew what to say. How could they? One evening earlier, I had walked into an anniversary party believing I understood my family history. Now I was driving home, wondering whether my real name had been stolen from me before I was old enough to remember it. I barely slept after we returned home. Every time I closed my eyes, memories surfaced in fragments that no longer felt random. A porch swing near the lake. A woman humming softly while folding laundry. The smell of cedar wood inside a cabin I supposedly had never visited. Around 3 a.m, I finally gave up trying to sleep and walked downstairs into the kitchen. Snow still drifted outside the windows under the yellow glow of the street lights. The house was silent except for the ticking clock above the stove. Then I noticed Daniel sitting alone at the dining table holding his phone. He looked up immediately when he saw me. I did not want to wake you, he said softly. I sat across from him slowly. You have that look on your face, I murmured. What look? The one you get when you already found something. Daniel hesitated before sliding his phone across the table toward me. I searched online, he admitted quietly. My stomach tightened instantly. About what? The lake accident in Vermont. I stared at the screen. There was an old newspaper article scanned from microfilm archives dated August 1968. The headline alone made my chest tighten. 2 children missing after storm near Lake Champlain. My hands trembled as I read further. Search teams had spent days looking for 2 young girls after severe weather separated several families vacationing near the lake. One child had been found wandering near a roadside diner 48 hours later. The second child was never located. Oh my God! I whispered. Daniel pointed lower on the article. Read the names. I forced myself to continue. Missing child number 1, Eleanor Grace Bennett, age 5. Missing child number 2, Diane Carter, age 6. I stopped breathing. Slowly I looked up at Daniel. No, I whispered immediately. No, that cannot be right. But deep inside me, I already knew why my father had looked terrified when I mentioned 1968. The article clearly stated that Diane Carter had disappeared during the storm. Not me. I grabbed the phone again, rereading every line carefully. It was undeniable. According to public records, my sister had been the missing Carter child. Not me. Then who was found? Rachel asked quietly from the hallway behind us. I had not even realized she was awake. She stepped into the kitchen wearing sweatpants and one of my old college sweatshirts, her face pale from exhaustion. Mom, she whispered carefully. If Aunt Diane disappeared, then who are you? Nobody answered because none of us understood anymore. I felt physically sick. Every truth from the anniversary party had just shifted again. Either the newspaper article was wrong, or someone in my family had lied about far more than I imagined. Daniel zoomed in on another section of the article. There is more. I forced myself to keep reading. Witnesses reported confusion during the storm due to poor visibility and panicked evacuations. One unidentified child had been recovered near Route 7 but initially refused to speak to authorities. The child was later reunited with family members. No official records identified which family reclaimed the child. A cold wave moved through my entire body. Unidentified child, I whispered. Rachel sat beside me slowly. Mom, what if Grandpa took the wrong child? The room went completely silent. Because suddenly, horribly, it made sense. My father had said I looked enough like their family. Enough. Not identical. Not certain. Enough. I stood up too quickly and walked toward the kitchen window, trying to breathe normally. Snow continued falling softly outside while my mind raced through every possibility. If Diane had originally disappeared, then why did everyone spend decades acting like I was the lost child? Why had my mother whispered, "You are Evelyn now," beside my bed? And worst of all, where was the real Evelyn Carter? My chest tightened painfully at the thought. There is something else, Daniel said quietly behind me. I turned back toward the table. He looked deeply uncomfortable now. The Bennett family. What about them? He hesitated before answering. Eleanor Bennett's mother spent years claiming the wrong child had been returned after the storm. I froze completely. What? Rachel covered her mouth softly in shock. Daniel looked down at the article again. According to local interviews, she believed her daughter was still alive. My pulse pounded violently now. Did anyone believe her? Daniel swallowed hard. Most people thought grief made her unstable. The kitchen suddenly felt too small to breathe inside. I pressed both hands against the counter while another memory surfaced unexpectedly. A woman crying beside a police station parking lot while reaching toward me. Someone pulling me away from her. A man's voice saying sharply, "Do not confuse the child further." Tears filled my eyes instantly because for the first time, I understood something unbearable. Maybe someone had tried to tell the truth years ago. And nobody listened. By sunrise, I had made a decision. I could not spend another day trapped between half memories and family lies. If Eleanor Bennett truly existed, then somewhere there had to be records, photographs, or people who remembered what happened at that lake nearly 60 years ago. Daniel offered to come with me, but I needed to do this part alone. Around 9 in the morning, I drove 3 hours north toward Vermont, while snow melted slowly along the highway's shoulders under pale winter sunlight. The entire drive felt surreal. Every mile carried me closer to a childhood I did not know belonged to me. I kept hearing my mother's voice repeating inside my head. You are Evelyn now. Not you are safe. Not we love you. You are Evelyn now. Like a command. Like a correction. The town near Lake Champlain looked smaller than I imagined. Quiet streets. Old diners. White church steeples rising above frozen trees. The kind of New England town where everyone probably knew everyone else in 1968. I parked outside the public library first because small towns always keep old newspapers and records longer than people expect. The woman working at the front desk looked about 70, and wore large reading glasses hanging from a silver chain around her neck. When I explained I was researching the lake accident from August 1968, something in her expression changed immediately. The Bennett story? She asked softly. My chest tightened. You remember it? Everybody around here remembers it. She led me downstairs into the archive room where rows of old newspaper reels and storage boxes lined the walls. That poor mother never stopped searching, she said quietly while pulling open a filing drawer. People said grief broke her heart. I swallowed hard. What was her name? The librarian looked down at a folder before answering. Margaret Bennett. The name hit me with strange familiarity. Not recognition exactly. More like emotional gravity pulling at something deep inside me. She handed me several newspaper clippings and left me alone at the archive table. My hands shook slightly as I opened the first article. There she was. Margaret Bennett. Blonde hair. Soft smile. Blue stone bracelet on her wrist. The exact woman from my memories. Tears filled my eyes instantly. Because I knew her face before my mind fully accepted why. The article described her as a local elementary school music teacher whose daughter vanished during the storm near the lake. According to the report, Margaret spent years insisting authorities return the wrong child after the accident. Most officials dismissed her claims due to emotional distress and lack of evidence. But one sentence near the bottom nearly stopped my heart. Mrs. Bennett maintained until her death that her daughter recognized her during their final meeting but was removed before she could speak privately with the child. I could barely breathe reading those words. Final meeting. The parking lot memory returned immediately. The woman crying. Reaching for me. Someone pulling me away. Do not confuse the child further. My vision blurred with tears. She knew. All those years ago, she knew I was her daughter. And nobody listened to her. I pressed trembling fingers against my mouth, trying not to break down in the middle of the library archive room. Then another detail caught my attention. Margaret Bennett died in 1987. 39 years old. I stared at the date for several seconds. She spent nearly 20 years searching for me before she died. The realization crushed something inside me I could not explain. A mother had spent decades grieving a daughter who was alive less than 200 miles away. And I had never known her name. Suddenly I heard footsteps approaching behind me. You have her eyes. I turned sharply. An elderly man stood near the archive doorway holding a wool coat over one arm. He looked startled to see me so emotional. I am sorry, he said gently. I did not mean to frighten you. Do I know you? I asked quietly. He studied my face carefully before nodding once. I knew Margaret. My pulse quickened immediately. Who are you? Walter Green, he answered softly. I was the town sheriff back then. Every nerve in my body tightened. This man had been there. You remember the accident? His expression darkened with age and regret. Every day. He slowly sat across from me at the archive table. When I walked in just now, he said quietly, I thought I was seeing a ghost. I could barely speak. Sheriff Green, did my family take the wrong child? He looked at me for a very long time before answering. No, he said softly. That is not exactly what happened. My stomach dropped instantly. Then what happened? The old sheriff sighed heavily and folded his hands together. Your father knew exactly who you were the moment he saw you. A cold wave moved through my entire body. What? Robert Carter was there the night you were found, Walter continued quietly. And your mother begged him to tell the truth. I felt dizzy suddenly. Then why did he not? The sheriff's eyes filled with something that looked painfully close to shame. Because your father believed bringing you home would save his marriage. The sheriff's words stayed with me the entire drive home. Your father believed bringing you home would save his marriage. I must have replayed that sentence 100 times while snow melted against the windshield and the gray Vermont sky slowly darkened into evening. Nothing about my life felt stable anymore. I was not just grieving a stolen identity. I was grieving decades of choices made by people who looked at a frightened little girl and decided she was useful. Useful enough to keep. Useful enough to rename. Useful enough to build a family around. When I finally pulled into my driveway in Connecticut, I noticed another car parked outside the house. My mother's car. For a second I considered driving away again. But I was too exhausted to run from the truth anymore. Linda sat alone in my kitchen when I walked inside. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her. Fragile. The anniversary makeup was gone now, and without it she looked every one of her 79 years. A cold cup of coffee sat untouched in front of her, while Daniel quietly gave me space and disappeared upstairs with Rachel. My mother stood the moment she saw me. "Evelyn, do not," I interrupted softly. "Please do not call me that until I understand who I am." Tears filled her eyes instantly. I never wanted this to happen. I removed my coat slowly and sat across from her at the kitchen table. The same table where she packed my school lunches. Helped Rachel decorate Christmas cookies. Taught me how to make blueberry pie from scratch. Suddenly every memory carried two emotions at once. Love and betrayal existing side by side. "The sheriff told me everything," I said quietly. Her face strained of color. "Walter still remembers?" "He remembers enough." She sat down heavily again, gripping the edge of the table with trembling fingers. "Your father was terrified of losing me back then," she whispered. "Our marriage was falling apart after Diane disappeared." I stared at her carefully. "Diane really disappeared?" Linda nodded slowly. "For 2 days. Then what happened?" My mother closed her eyes briefly. "The storm separated everyone near the lake. Police found Diane first. Then hours later they found you wandering near the highway." My chest tightened painfully. "And Dad knew I was not his child." Tears slipped down her face again. "Yes." Hearing her finally say it aloud felt strangely worse than all the secrets before it. Because now there was no confusion left. No uncertainty. Just truth. "Margaret Bennett tried to take me home," I whispered. My mother started crying harder immediately. "She begged the police to let her speak to you alone," Linda admitted. "She said you recognized her." "Did I?" My mother looked down at her hands. "Yes." The room became completely silent. I felt something inside me breaking quietly beyond repair. Then, "Why?" I asked finally. "Why would you do that to another mother?" Linda covered her face for a moment before answering. "Because after Diane came home safely, your father became convinced God had brought you to us for a reason." I laughed softly then, but there was no humor in it. "A reason?" He thought starting over with another little girl would heal our family. So he stole one instead. "Evelyn, no," I said firmly. "Do not soften this anymore." My mother looked devastated. "I loved you," she whispered desperately. "From the very first day, I loved you. That was the cruelest part of all. I believed her. Despite everything, I believed she truly loved me. Maybe that was why this hurt so much. Because monsters would have been easier to hate. But they were flawed people who convinced themselves love could justify something unforgivable." "Did Dad ever regret it?" I asked quietly. My mother wiped tears from her cheeks slowly. "Every day. I thought about the coldness my father carried through my entire childhood. The distance. The strange guilt hiding beneath every interaction. Suddenly I understood it differently. He did not hate me because I was unwanted. He hated me because every time he looked at me, he saw what he had done. That is why he said I should have stayed buried in the past." I whispered. Linda nodded once. The older he became, the more afraid he was that the truth would come out. I leaned back in my chair feeling emotionally hollow. 62 years. 62 years built on someone else's grief. Then another thought hit me suddenly. What happened to Diane? My mother blinked in confusion. "What do you mean? Why does she act terrified every time this comes up?" Linda hesitated too long. My stomach tightened instantly. "Mom." She looked away before speaking. Because Diane knew the truth before anyone else. A cold wave moved through me. How long? Since she was 13. I stared at her in disbelief. She knew I was not her sister? My mother nodded weakly. Your father made her promise never to tell you. Suddenly dozens of childhood memories made horrifying sense. Diane avoiding family conversations. Diane watching me strangely. Whenever old photographs appeared. Diane acting guilty every time I asked questions about the past. So everybody knew except me. I whispered. Not everybody, my mother said softly. Your daughter did not know. Your husband did not know. And honestly, she looked at me with unbearable sadness then. After enough years, I think part of me forgot too. I stared at her for a long moment before standing slowly from the table. I cannot do this tonight. Panic crossed her face instantly. Please do not leave angry. I looked at the woman who raised me. The woman who tucked me into bed. The woman who stole me from another mother, and then spent decades loving me anyway. I am not angry anymore, I said quietly. I am just finally awake.